this webinar is to introduce something that we're doing in the higher education zone on radical teaching and learning spaces. We're going to move that. Start by looking at the paper that's been produced by the higher education team that came out Tuesday at Zones. We're going to talk a little bit about student union projects that are going to happen, and I'll touch briefly on the inclusivity element object, which we'll go into more details about in the December webinar. If you can, please type them in the chat window and I'll answer them as I go along, hopefully. So the paper that's just come out has 4 key themes. So each of those themes in turn, they are deconstructing the lecture, in values and beliefs, forming learning spaces, and a radical approach to measuring quality. When we start to look at the lecture, the first thing we're asking is there something actually wrong with the lecture? We're looking at the key issues in learning spaces and what alternatives may be to the lecture itself. Gone too far. We aren't saying that there's something intrinsically wrong with the lecture. More conceals a systematic problem that runs through aspects of teaching environments. The reality is that the idea of the lecturer stands in front of a passive audience of students transmitting information is often not what students receive when they attend their lectures. Often lectures are interactive, they involve student engagement, and they're there to inform students and help students to learn. Even then, this sort of a passive receiving form of teaching certainly still has its place, not just as a marker for students to organise their own learning around, with complementary seminars, study groups, or learning spaces. The lecture is a convenient method of teaching in an era of massification of learning. Utility in times of increasing standardisation, increasing the ever-demanded contact time from students, but in singular and standardised ways. So the lecture itself still has its place, but in becoming a central part of this standardised approach to maths teaching that is ubiquitous across higher education, it can't function alone. It lacks the inclusivity we need in a modern democratic education setting. So we've identified in the lecture model, firstly, learning spaces and teaching methods are often geared towards surface learning, meaning that the focus is on memorising facts rather than developing a reflexive understanding. This seems to contradict general belief and expectation of most lecturers that students should be engaging in their course materials and in the content of their courses at a much deeper level, developing this deeper understanding. Secondly, the structure of this form of learning is often authoritarian rather than democratic. Often, the ability of students to contribute their ideas, their thoughts and beliefs that can be made visible is limited by the fact that with that learning space, the academic holds all of the power. And too much of the time, the student plays the role of a passive listener, while the teacher simply deposits facts that they may be learning for an exam or to iterate in an essay. Point. Lecturers and teachers, both lecturers and teachers are often constrained by standardised and bureaucratic processes. Critique certainly is not of lecturers. We want to empower them to innovate, to work with students, to learn with and from their students, and make their role more rewarding. And means less rigidity in the form of learning spaces that lecturers get to work within. Learning spaces such as to reproduce existing inequalities rather than challenging them. The equal democratic power relations in educational settings take into account for social inequalities that affect the life chances and progression of students. Doing so, this can help to legitimise them. The fifth point is that standardisation has led to unhelpful generalisations about students. Learning practice tends to be designed for the generic image of the student. It fails to take into account the diverse backgrounds and needs of students. There's some unhelpful assumptions that all students learn in the same way and at the same rate and come to university with similar skills and knowledge. And the fourth key issue It's measures of teaching quality, and we'll see more length in a bit, themselves are problematic. The way we measure quality have been conducted within this discourse of marketisation and performance measurement. It's largely quantitative and target-based, and it doesn't tell us much about how, what, and in what function students are actually learning and how they're applying that to their actual lives. So, alternative, careful not to kind of romanticize other forms of teaching and learning, because alternative methods have their own pitfalls too. There isn't a magic one-size-fits-all solution, and lectures aren't the evil that means that students aren't getting a high-quality teaching and learning experience. What we're looking to do is articulate the key values that underpin inclusive learning environments, and they can include lectures and ways that benefit both students and wider society. And that's what I'll talk a little bit about for the 10 minutes or so. Next is looking at inclusivity in learning. What is inclusivity, inclusive education and social change? We go forward in higher education until we've developed an academic culture that is designed to contest social and economic inequalities that students experience in wider society. And we continue to create this uneven student experience for students from different backgrounds. Inclusivity only means teaching and learning that takes account of students' diverse backgrounds. But we should be embracing this diversity by valuing and utilising the many different capabilities, expectations, and knowledge that students bring to the course, all of which will be culturally relative. So I believe that the starting point for ensuring that everyone gets the most out of their study is a learning environment which fosters respect, empathy, and the pursuit of cultural awareness. Inclusivity is going to require structure within the education system, so that universities are committed to widening the diversity of their student body as well. But it also has to work for academics. Pedagogy and learning spaces can only flourish in an academic workforce that is diverse and inclusive, when gender and ethnicity no longer affect opportunities and progression, and where the makeup of not just academics who are the coalface in teaching, but professors and administrators is more reflective of a diverse student body. This belief that education can engage and help solve real world problems and be at the core of social change is actually founded and embedded in the statements of many universities. In the Robbins Report, which led to the expansion of higher education in the 1960s, and it's certainly the bedrock of the brick universities and what you may call the Russell Group nowadays. But universities appear to be stuck in an market-driven environment that are site of the wider social aims of education. The values that underpin ideas of radical and inclusive learning can often be at odds with this view of education, which are treated as consumers. So in order for universities to foster more inclusive learning environments, students must be empowered as active and participatory agents in their education, not as consumers, so that they articulate their own conceptions of what makes good learning environments for them and work in partnership with academics and administrators to realise these conceptions on their courses. A little bit about the ideas of how we may transform learning spaces, and I'll talk in more detail about this too in relation to some of the work that we're going to carry out for the rest of the academic year. We believe in learning spaces is a core dynamic to improve on this standardised model of teaching that we've identified, and tackling issues raised earlier in this deconstruction of the lecture, because we can't start to radically reimagine student experiences without continuing to forge active partnerships between students and teaching staff. In fact, three key themes that we feel act as foundational blocks to this new kind of radical and inclusive learning environment: transformative learning, pedagogies, and inclusive technology. So, formative learning. Formative learning refers to a style of adult education, autonomous, responsible thinkers, and this works by encouraging learners to reflect on their own learning experience and challenge their underlying cultural assumptions and presuppositions in a safe environment. The transformative learning is in creating a learning environment that allows individuals who are interacting with the space to They're aware of how ideas, values and beliefs influence the way in which they learn. But it requires certain conditions that relate to the inclusivity of learning space, namely that both lecturers and students have freedom from coercion and the influence of power, that every learning space has an equal opportunity to contribute and equal chance to hear others, and that there is an equal opportunity to question and challenge within a space that is safe enough to do that. And we may call that something like a non-sterile safe space, where students are encouraged to challenge each other, but so in a way that doesn't cause long-term damage to one another. One of those radical pedagogies. So critical approaches to pedagogy recognise education is never an objective venture, that it does sit and form objective knowledge. It is by the dominant group in society to legitimise their values and their position, and likewise it can be used as a tool for liberation, by giving a chance to think critically about the way things are and to change society for the better. Critical pedagogy is about connecting knowledge with power and social awareness. It's allowing learners to develop political agency and use what they have learned to challenge and innovate. The educational process is praxis, one in which we've seen considerable progress in creating radical pedagogies is in gender studies and feminist teaching. Teachers have constructed their own critical pedagogies to embed feminist theory into the practice of feminism, creating a more critical and inclusive learning environment. And this is what's key to this idea of a critical pedagogy, that the learning that you're doing and the styles in which you are learning are central to the learning environment itself. They're not enough to learn feminism out of books, but the feminist practices have to be embedded in those learning styles. One of the reasons why feminist pedagogy has become so useful in building and reflecting on how to build inclusive learning spaces is that it can be applied to challenge all inequalities, not only that of gender. And one of the key moves in feminist teaching, particularly the relationship between feminist teaching and critical race theory, has been to understand the relationship between gender, race, class, sexuality and other forms of discrimination that are often otherwise unchallenged in traditional modes of teaching and learning. The form of transforming learning spaces that we've identified is the inclusive technology. Now, to say technology is transforming the way we interact with and communicate knowledge and ideas is a new idea. It isn't the technology in itself that is transforming education and society. Rather, it's the creative ways in which people are using this technology to educate and drive change. Build on the assumptions of transformative learning, that inner creativity can be learned and practiced. Technology in itself is a powerful medium through which such habits can be developed. In particular, we've seen many exciting ways in which technology is able to communicate information in interesting new forms. It's a very important source of interaction between students for peer-to-peer learning, in which a lecturer can also engage as an active facilitator. It provides a medium to share instant thoughts and feedback in a constructive and democratic manner. Obviously, there are benefits and risks associated with the use of technology, as there are many of the other things that we're talking about. So the learning environment, lecturers have concerns that a more widespread use of tablets and smartphones within classrooms can lead to distractions and discrete participation. However, the argument that we're making is that the learning space should be inclusive and stimulating. Students won't be distracted when they're engaged in their learning. Technology can enhance their engagement. Concerns that focus on the challenges that online resources and learning spaces have, both on the physical role of academic staff and intellectual property rights. Moving towards a more open access environment, where access to research is more egalitarian, but also leaves it more open to abuse by market forces. So the growth of the MOOC is a particular example of this, where benefits of open and mobile access to learning resources can all lead to the unfair exploitation of academic labour. But the use with technology and learning are associated with why and how technology is used. So if we stick pools of inclusive learning, we can ensure technology plays an enhancing role for student and lecturer. We know that the following areas can help us forge a deeper understanding of how these learning spaces can be constructed on the basis of this idea of a radical inclusive partnership. The essential ideas that are thrown through all of these are that partnership can only work when we never a neutral space, and we work to mitigate the unequal power relationship between teachers and students, provide a safe space to explore the backgrounds and needs of students, and use to challenge exclusionary practice. It's important that we link in real-world experiences and problem-solving into learning, and making use of technology and technological innovation to develop inclusivity. Of the paper is looking at a radical approach to measuring quality. How in this radical system will we know students are learning? The approach to quality assurance and assessment wasn't designed to measure quality of inclusive learning. And this means that we need to find a new way of assessing both the inclusivity of spaces, but also ensuring that these spaces are productive and get the best out of students. The social construct, it's in its form debates around what is of value within education and how that value can be measured. And these debates around educational value are heavily context dependent, and means that they represent what quality means at any specific point in time. The current system of quality assurance in higher education is very much the product of a dominant set of political discourses around marketisation and modernisation. There's an emphasis on customer satisfaction, setting target standards and performance management. It is likely, however, that this system is going to change. The recent announcement that the Quality Assurance Agency will, 2015, resulting in a tendering process for a new organisation to put quality assurance. That brings the danger of the process being completely privatised and therefore out of democratic control. Keep an eye on this and see how this is happening. Approach to quality, as we've already mentioned, and inclusive teaching and learning, a breakthrough of the current constraints of a consumer-focused marketised HE system. Also, therefore, needs a definition of quality and work for quality assessment that is based on the values and beliefs that underpin the partnership agenda. It doesn't necessarily mean that the current measures of quality are not good enough, but there has to be an acceptance that measures like student retention, degree attainment, employability and student satisfaction don't necessarily tell us about students are actually learning, and they're affecting a whole range of factors unrelated to teaching and learning. All of this is in finding innovative ways to measure and improve the quality of assessment and feedback in HE. NUS has put together a toolkit setting out the principles of effective feedback and assessment and to develop an outstanding partnership approach. It highlights the need for students to be empowered and give tools and support to design high quality practice in their institution, and then feedback is a powerful driver for personal development throughout their course, rather than the standardised process that aids the student from their learning. The lesson is that the quality of teaching practices, like assessment and feedback, can be measured by utilising the same partnership practices designed to improve them. Because students engaged in a meaningful process of co-designing and co-investing in feedback, they're always already engaged in and co-responsible for the quality of the process. Apologies. So that is an overview of some of the work that we've been doing in the radical learning, and that paper is available. If you want to send me an email, I'll write my address window, then you can get one sent out to you. It's been implemented is in a series of projects that student unions are going to be running over the next academic year. We have 8 unions involved. They're coming together on the 14th of November in USHQ for the training day. And what's happening is that we'll be supporting them to develop student-led radical education spaces. What they look like will be developed and understood on the day, both in relation to each other, but also contextual to each person's institution. And we'll be supporting student unions on those projects on May. And do that, we'll have to run more in the new year. So if you are interested in getting involved, then do please drop us a line and see what we can do to support you with your work. And also, if you're not directly involved in a new ESSES project, but you're developing and running these type of spaces on your campus. And again, we're happy to come and help you get involved and support you with the work that you're doing. We'll also be launching some projects with radical education organisations to look at making their space inclusive. We're identifying those organisations at the moment. So if you have any ideas for organisations, again, do please get in touch. Have any questions? If you do, type them in the chat window. No? Well, thank you very much. That is the end of that webinar. If you do have any questions, put in touch with me at sarah.kerton@ed.org.uk. Thank you very much.